In the quiet pre-dawn hours of Saturday, September 25th, 2021, a small army of amateur radio operators and other volunteers gathered to begin preparations for an amazing event involving thousands and thousands of bicycle riders. Because this public service is what hams do. Welcome to this 6th edition of What Hams Do, the TV show. I'm Jay Silver, the Public Information Coordinator for the Eastern Pennsylvania section of the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio. In this program, we'll focus on one of the many reasons people become amateur radio operators, public service. Oh, and welcome as well to our guest co-anchor, Sharon Smith, amateur call sign KC3PMV. Sharon, you may remember as a scout leader from Danville, Pennsylvania, who along with her husband Tom, runs a troupe of all young women focused on amateur radio. And their daughter Abby was the subject of our first What Hams Do TV show last year. Sharon, I'm so glad you could join us for tonight's show.
Jay, I'm so excited to participate in the What Hams Do TV show about public service in amateur radio. It's one aspect of this hobby that brings so many of us to get our FCC amateur radio licenses.
Thanks, Sharon. We'll get started with our program right after this message from the ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio.
She's collected stories from the Australian outback.
Good day, mate.
Shared jokes in Israel.
Little man walks to the doctor, said, "Doctor, I have a ram."
Recipes with Parisians. Gets first-hand hurricane reports from the Caribbean.
That they are in the process of evacuating.
Weather reports from the sun. And traffic reports from any place she wants to go. She's a radio ham. Learn how at helloradio.org. ARRL, the National Association for Amateur Radio.
Public service is a key reason why 750,000 Americans are in the amateur radio hobby. And one great example of amateur radio public service takes place at the end of September every year. The annual MS-150 City to Shore Bike Ride is the second largest fundraising event in the world for the Multiple Sclerosis Society. And it can't happen without the participation of amateur radio operators.
The hams are the communications background of this event. We could not do without them, and it's been that way since we started.
And what do they do for you?
So basically, relaying information back and forth about where cyclists are. If there are any injuries, they help us with that and really help us coordinate everything.
The MS-150 was canceled in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So resuming this important fundraiser was an emotionally powerful moment for all those who want so desperately to defeat this dreadful disease.
We're just excited after, what is this, day 582 of the pandemic, that we're just so excited to be back out here, be able to do this ride and raise money for people living with MS.
How much money do you think you'll raise?
So I think our goal was to raise 3.5. I think we're going to raise 3.8. And if we're really fortunate and people are generous, hopefully we'll hit 4 million. And we really need to do that after what we've been through over the last 582 days.
As of the premiere date of this program, the number is at $3.5 million and still counting. That's money contributed by riders and their sponsors. Let's listen as Kevin tells us more about the annual MS-150 bike ride. How many bike riders are you expecting here?
So we've got 3,800 registered, and we should see about 3,300 today.
That's amazing. Now, where are they going?
So everyone is going to end up in beautiful Ocean City, New Jersey.
And where are we right now?
And we are at Woodcrest Station in Cherry Hill.
And how long a ride is that?
It's 75 miles, and then for those people who really want to challenge, there's an extra 25 you can do to make it a 100-mile ride.
And how do they get back?
Well, they can either ride back, which a lot of them do on Sunday, or there's bus transportation, and a lot of them make a weekend out of it, so friends and family gather at different condos and places along the shore.
As dawn approached, riders got in position to start the 75-mile trek. In past years, ridership has been in the range of 8,000, but the pandemic has had its effect on the numbers. Still, it was an impressive scene just after sunup as thousands began the trip.
Those passenger vans and box trucks we showed you earlier are by now stationed along the route, along with 149 amateur radio operators. It's a coordinated ballet orchestrated by Joe DiBartolo, seen here checking out one of the vans at the Backup or Shadow Command Center in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
My name is Joseph DiBartolo, Kilo Charlie 2, Sierra Foxtrot Bravo.
And what's your role with the MS-150 ride?
At this current time, I lead the communications team and I lead the transportation.
So you're in charge of the ham radio operators.
Yes, I am.
Tell me about that process. What do the ham radio operators do for the MS-150?
Okay, we have a multitude of duties and responsibilities. Along with having all the information in and out of our command centrals, we have folks that are on the route. We have folks that are in SAGs, we have folks at every rest stop, we have folks that are on bicycles, folks that are on motorcycles, anything to make sure of the safety and security of the ride. What we do is we take in all the information to relay to the society to let them know where people are being moved, where people are located, if there's any problems on the road, if there's any situations that have to be handled that are out of the norm from the ride. It's a matter of we keep all of the movement going for the ride.
So let's say a bike rider gets in trouble. How does a ham radio operator deal with that? What happens then?
Well, we've always told for the 35 plus years that the hams have been doing this, the riders are told, if you get in trouble, look for that car on the road with the big antenna on it. They are the guys that can help you. What they'll do is either another rider will ride up and say, hey, one of our guys broke down or there was an injury or something like that, then we're able to call it into Command Central to where then SAG can be dispatched, support people can be dispatched, and or hopefully not, if ambulance needs to be, medical needs to be dispatched. All that is done through the communications end, so that they don't use cell phones because of all the dead areas out there, and ham radio is the way to get through to everybody at the same time.
That's amazing. Now, Joe, how long have you been doing this?
This is my 20th year. I started out as a truck driver my year one and was brought into it from a friend of mine who had already been a ham in the event for a lot of years. I was in the truck and I asked him to give me one of his radios to use, and he did. And the gentleman who was running things at that time did not like the idea that I was getting on the radio without a license. And that caused me, at that point, gave me the go-ahead to go and get my license.
For Joe DiBartolo, being involved in the MS-150 ride as an amateur radio volunteer is much more than the public service aspect of ham radio. He explains it this way.
They were looking for truck drivers that had CDL licenses. And the guy who was running it at the time was on the phone with my friend, and he told him what's happening. And I said, he says, well, he's looking for CDL drivers. I said, well, for it. He said, well, I do this ham radio event every year with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. I said, really? I said, well, you know what, call him back. Number one, I have my CDL, and my better half had just been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 4 months prior. And it became something very dear to my heart.
So you have a very personal reason for getting involved.
Yes, yes.
What's the future of this ride? The pandemic has affected it pretty significantly. What happened last year?
Well, they had to cancel the ride due to the pandemic. Unfortunately, it did make this year's ride a lot smaller than it normally is. But our hopes are that as the pandemic winds down, that things will again begin to increase in ridership. Like I said, we're about half what we normally are, but it's still It's a major thing. It's the second largest event in the world for the society, and we're very proud as hams to be a part of it and be assistants to these folks to help find a cure for this horrible disease.
And how many ham radio operators have you enlisted for this?
This year was was a good year for us. We had 149 ham folks that are involved with the event, and with them come non-hams that help also to support the hams. So all total, we have about 170 volunteers working under us right now.
Inside the primary command center in Ocean City and this shadow command center in Cherry Hill, volunteers man radios and computers. At this station, SAG wagon locations are constantly updated.
So we're just tracking where the SAGs are and their location, and we just update it as they go along. So we always know where any particular SAG is and what their location is at any given time.
I'm a new ham as of this year, and this is my first time doing this event, so I'm shadowing today. I'm kind of learning how to use the software system, and I'm learning how to use the radio in the appropriate way so that tomorrow I can pick up and help out with the process that she's doing right now.
This little black antenna on one of the SAG wagons is connected to a GPS receiver, which in turn sends the GPS coordinates of the wagon by an amateur radio transmitter back to the command center.
Here in the pre-dawn hours, we see Jim Fisher, a longtime MS-150 volunteer, installing GPS and ham radio antennas on the bus that can be used to transport groups of riders if need be.
We just powered up the APRS tracker using the Tiny Track 3 and an old 2-meter radio. Got the GPS lock. So we're good. It should be pinging shortly. They'll see that we posted the rest stops, so it makes sense, and you'll see the vehicles, the SAG vehicles, and the staff and situation cars, which are also being watched. You'll see them moving throughout the course of the race.
At this rest stop in Hamilton, New Jersey, and the other rest stops along the route, the thousands of riders can take a break. They can enjoy a meal and take advantage of pop-up bike shops to get bicycles repaired and tuned up. While amateur radio operators are stationed all along the route, about a mile apart, they also work at all the rest stops. Meet Erin Gordon. Her ham radio call sign is AC2JL. She's been working as an MS-150 ham radio volunteer for years. Her disability, not related by the way to multiple sclerosis, never stopped her from working this incredible event.
What do I do here? I wear a bunch of different hats. I am a liaison between the Multiple Sclerosis Society staff people that run the rest stop. I keep track of the SAGs, support and gear teams that come in and out. I try to make sure riders don't get lost when they're leaving the rest stop. If they were trying to go the wrong direction, I point them in the right way. It's basically a bunch of juggling. Well, the good thing about being in a rest stop is there are others that I can point them to. There's an EMS tent, so for anyone that's having medical challenges, they can go directly to an EMT to get attended to. If they have an issue with their bike, I'm sitting right in front of the bike shop that's spread out over 4 tents to be able to deal with flats or tuning up a bike so that the rider can keep continuing. Get to refuel their bodies by the food tents all the way over there. They have a DJ to pick up people's spirits. There's a lot of stuff you find in the rest stop, and it all somehow works together to be a good experience for the riders.
And how long have you been doing this, Erin?
The first year I volunteered for the City to Shore ride was 2006, and I was along the route on the side of the road, keeping track of when SAG teams or first cyclist or other things passed, and calling that in and then just cheering on the riders. But physically that was more challenging for me with the bathroom situation of having to load up, go to the nearest rest stop, and then get back to where I was. So a couple of years later, when I volunteered the second time, they offered me the position in a rest stop, and I said, sure, I'll do it. What does that mean? And I learned that one on the fly. And it's been a good fit. I did that starting in 2008, I think, and it's been every year that they've run the ride. And as far as I'm aware, there's only 2 years that it hasn't happened. The first one was the year Pope visited Philadelphia, because that bumped the event a week, and then a hurricane blew in and put Ocean City underwater. And then last year with the pandemic, because unfortunately large crowds plus no vaccine is not a good recipe for health and safety.
So do you have other amateur radio friends who are here?
I have friends that are working the SAG teams. My father is a communicator, driver on one of the SAGs, and 2 others that I personally know and actually are part of the same radio club that I participate in.
What radio club is that?
Burlington County Radio Club, K2TD.
Gotcha. So now the other question I wanted to ask you was, do you know people with MS?
Yes, I have 4 friends that are living with it. 2 are sisters that I met through Alpha Phi Omega, which is the National Co-ed Service Fraternity. And 2 people I know from my church are personally involved.
Erin, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's a work of heart. That's all I can say.
A work of heart. Well put, Erin. We should mention that Alpha Phi Omega is a national fraternal organization focusing on public service with more than 500,000 members nationwide. It's no wonder we find public service-oriented amateur radio operators like Erin Gordon among their members. Now, as Erin mentioned, her dad's involved too, as a ham radio communicator and SAG wagon driver.
My name's Jack Gordon. WA2RHJ is my amateur radio call. And I've been an MS volunteer on the City to Shore ride for probably 25 years. The first 15 were along the route, just spotting bikes and things as they went by. The last 10 have been in SAG, as a SAG driver and communicator. And you run the whole route, so it's a very interesting job. It's a little different every year.
We asked Jack if he considered the public service aspect of amateur radio when he volunteered for this job.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I got my amateur radio license back in the 1977 to do ARES and races and all kinds of public service events.
ARES is the Amateur Radio Emergency Service, and RACES is the Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. And you can learn more about both of these in previous editions of the What Hams Do TV show. I'll post the links in the description below this video. In this event, there are 9 support and gear wagons, and the guy who's in charge of them is Andrew Furlong.
Well, Jay, my role as one of the communications operations team members is to help organize stuff ahead of time, and then to make sure things go smoothly for all of our communicators who come out to help us out during the weekend, and make sure that if they have any problems that we're getting them addressed, and that anything that they need is taken care of from a management perspective.
Now, we're standing in front of what's euphemistically called a SAG wagon, support and gear wagon. And what's the purpose of this wagon?
So the support and gear teams are out on the route to make sure that any riders that either have an accident or become too tired to continue, have a mechanical breakdown, can get picked up and brought into the next rest stop, or all the way as far as they want to go, as far as the finish line, and to make sure that they're able to safely get off the road, and that we don't have people in private vehicles coming to pick them up off the side and causing hazards.
And how does a SAG wagon know that there's somebody in trouble?
So when the SAG vehicles drive down the route, what they'll do is look out for any cyclists who look like they're on the side of the road not moving, and they'll give a thumbs up. And if the cyclist responds with a thumbs up, that means that they're good, they're just taking a break. If they respond with a thumbs down, then the SAG vehicle will stop and find out what's going on and if necessary, pick them up and bring them on in.
What role does amateur radio play in the dispatch of sag wagons?
Well, in the sag wagons, it's actually a very important role. So we have amateur operators in all of the sag vehicles to let us know when they're arriving and departing rest stops, when they're picking up a cyclist, how many cyclists they're carrying. And then sometimes if a cyclist has to be taken to the hospital because they were in an accident, we'll ask the sag vehicles to pick up the bike that got left behind at the scene. And we need to keep track of those bike numbers very carefully to make sure that it can be reunited with their owner safe and sound.
What's in a sag wagon?
In a sag wagon, we've got a team of 2 vehicles, a van for the passengers and a box truck for the bikes. And we carry a basic assortment of items to secure the bikes in the trucks, to sometimes carry water bottles and whatnot to help the cyclist rehydrate. And then any of the radio equipment, APRS unit for tracking the movements, and any other stuff that the ham or the drivers of the vehicles might need for the weekend.
How many people have you helped today?
So far, I've been in my car. We've stopped for about 3 people, and the SAG vehicle here, I helped them stop and pick up at least 2, and they've already had 3 or 4 riders today on this truck alone, and that's not counting the other 8 vehicles out on the route.
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks to all 170 volunteers, including the 149 amateur radio operators, who helped make this year's MS-150 City to Shore ride a $3.5 million fundraising success.
Now, one thing you may have noticed is that every radio we showed you today was battery operated. One of the things amateur radio does well is operate when the power goes out, as it does in hurricanes, ice storms, and other potential disasters.
Every year, amateur radio shows off its ability to communicate in emergencies during the last weekend in June in an event we call Field Day.
Yeah, Kilo Bravo 3, India Victor, KB3IV. We're 1 Alpha EPA.
Amateur radio operators set up shop at campsites all across North America and demonstrate how they can communicate in emergencies. And Field Day is open to the public, so folks can see just how it works. Among them at this year's Field Day events was recently licensed Terrell Dorcius.
Yeah, I got my license in last September 2020.
Now, why did you go get a ham radio license?
I was curious about it, and I was interested in what things could be done from a disaster preparedness perspective, and one of the things that came to mind was around communications. In my mind, you know, we're very reliant on cell phones, very reliant on modern technology, but what happens when cell phones go down? For me, it's not an if, but a when. We know that, you know, they're all reliant on the towers, they're reliant on certain technology working, so, you know, I kind of came across ham radio and discovered, well, hey, this thing isn't contingent on, you know, Verizon or AT&T or any of the other big boys working, but, you know, it's just as long as you can get a signal up into the air, you're able to get communication out. So from there, I kind of took my, you know, research in and, you know, just developed an interest the more I learned about it.
So are there any particular incidents in the news over the last couple of years that made you think about this?
Yeah, I would say when we look at the different weather incidents that have happened, you know, incidents in Puerto Rico, things, you know, the weather instances in Haiti, you know, things all over the world where, you know, the network just goes down, you know, things that you couldn't account for, you know, it was kind of like, well, all right, well, how do people reach out to let their loved ones know, hey, I'm okay, or maybe I'm not okay, I need help, you know, who can help me? You know, those were some of the things that immediately came to mind.
So what brought you to Field Day?
What brought me to Field Day was, you know, after becoming a ham, you know, I kind of, you know, I did become a member of ARRL, and, you know, I watched a few different YouTube programs, you know, online, ham radio crash course and a few others, you know, and they mentioned that, hey, Field Day is this weekend. So I was like, all right, well, let me see what's actually in my area. So I went onto the ARRL website and, you know, decided to see, all right, well, who's out there? And I came across, you know, that there was something happening in Fort Washington State Park today. So that's where I was like, you know what, I have the time, I have the curiosity, let me just go there and see what this thing's all about.
Of course, amateur radio participation in emergencies, like the ones Terrell described, is a prime example of the public service tradition that's built up in the amateur radio service since its inception in the early 20th century. But now, with the latest digital technologies, our ability to get messages out in emergencies is greatly enhanced. Here, Philadelphia Emergency Coordinator Cliff Hotchkiss is demonstrating how a tiny handheld radio can be used with a battery-powered laptop to send emergency digital messages over the air.
What we're doing is digital modes with a Baofeng HT. And the key here is two things. One, the Baofeng has Vox operation. Are you everyone familiar with Vox operation? It's voice activated transmit. So you don't have to push the transmit button. So whatever your digital mode that you're using on your laptop, when it transmits, it triggers the Vox on your Baofeng. And it allows you to go straight from the radio into the computer with this cable. And it plugs into the mic speaker port of your Baofeng. And my laptop has a mic speaker port. If you have separate mic speaker ports, you'll need one of these little splitter guys. But mine just has the one plug, so I just plug that straight on in there. And that's literally it. I've got the power back down as far as I possibly can. And we'll see if we can and we have digital modes going on over a Baofeng HT.
So Sharon, did you and Tom and Abby participate in Field Day this year?
We did, Jay. We were hosted at Mosteller Farm by the president of our local radio club, Dave Mosteller, and you can see that we did actually pitch tents out in the field. We were making contacts late into the night, got up early in the morning, and had a lot of fun doing it. We made contacts using both digital and voice modes.
What a gorgeous place to go camping. It certainly looks like you guys had a great experience. So maybe one of you watching will get your amateur radio license in the coming year and join us outdoors for the 2022 Field Day in June.
And speaking of licenses, one way to prepare is to use hamstudy.org, which offers sample tests, flashcards, and questions for each of the 3 levels of ham radio licenses available from the FCC. The link to hamstudy.org is in this video's description below.
Sharon, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope we'll see you in future shows.
I hope so too, Jay. I had a great time. Thank you.
The subject of our next edition of What Hams Do is up in the air right now. We're looking at amateur radio and folks with disabilities, like my friend Austin, KA3TTT, who you might have seen in our first What Hams Do TV show, or Erin, AC2JL, who participated in this edition of the show. Another topic is Project More, a nonprofit organization based in Princeton, New Jersey, that hopes to get 500 or more young people from diverse backgrounds into amateur radio. Or maybe you have a topic you'd like us to pursue. Write to us in the comments below this video and we'll be sure to follow up. And that's it for this edition of our show. Thanks for watching. This is Jay Silber, WA2UAR, saying 73. That's how hams say goodbye, and reminding you, this isn't your grandfather's amateur radio. See you next time.